Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Focus Friday. I'm your host, Dan Mickle, and as always, you can reach me across all social media at Real Dan Mickle. Focus Friday is our weekly vlog focused on starting conversations in the coaching and educational spaces. And this week, we're looking at the concept of making it believable. And what I mean by that is a lot of times when we are teaching or coaching, we tend to start to add in components to our instruction and we get away from the original core of what we're trying to work on. And it now becomes almost unbelievable in the sense of this isn't how it's going to happen in a real performance or a real match or on a test. And we kind of need to keep it real, to be honest with you. And a couple areas that we can do that, and what I want to focus on first is skill level. A lot of times we are very quick to try and advance our players or our students to the next skill level. So we end up making drills or situations or practices that are beyond their scope. We're trying to push them into that next level, and that can actually have a demotivating effect for them because they feel like they're never going to get that level, that they're so far away from their goal or from achieving that they just may end up shutting down and not actually working towards that next step. So we have to make sure that we are within that proper range of skill level when we're working with our instruction. We obviously don't want to make it so easy that they're not learning or having any benefit of the training. But on the flip side, we also don't want to have it so tough and so hard that they end up giving up because they don't think they'll ever reach it. Now, I know the natural thought, especially in the athletic coaching world, is, we want them to see what the next level is. And I understand that. And that's okay to pepper that in here or there. But I think a lot of times we overestimate our players' ability to adapt and move up that next level, and we make these big jumps going, from where the player is at now to where we want them to be, and we think that if we just go straight to that top level and no matter how long, as long as they work hard and put the time in, they'll get there. And sometimes it needs to be a little bit more of a jump. So we want to make sure that the skill level is kind of in tune with what we're working with. Secondly, is a huge one for me, and something that I work on a lot lately is the environment. Are you actually creating the environment in your practices that is going to translate to what the environment then is in competition? We see a lot of times in football, for example, professional and college, a lot of times coaches will bring in crowd noise and music to try and reenact that. And I mean, that's kind of the extreme of what we're talking about. But just in maybe the personnel that's on the field or on the court when you're training, is it the same that's going to be there when we're in competition? A lot of times we have players standing around because we're working with player A, and then we have players, B and C just kind of hanging out while we wait. Is there a way that we can get them in there? Because they're going to be part of that equation in actual competition. So how can we use that? How can we make the environment as close to what we need in a performance or a competition scenario? In the educational field, if you're having a test or you're looking at some, big exam like the Keystone exams or, PSSAs or whatever you may be working on, standardized testing, when you practice for those things, are you practicing in the same environment where maybe it's required to be quiet and there's a time limit on it? Because that too can be a stressor. It's not just the questions that are on those tests, it's the environment of those tests. I remember taking the SATs and I was almost more intimidated by having to sit there and just have my pencil, and being in a room with people I didn't know was almost more intimidating than the questions on the SATs. So instead of just preparing for the questions, are you preparing your students, or are you preparing your athletes for the environment that they're going to be in? And again, it's easy in the athletic world to talk about the physical environment, crowd noise, how close the fans are to the court. But what about when they're actually going through the actions? And that kind of leads me to my third key point, which is tempo. Are you slowing it down or speeding things up too much during your training? Either slowing it down to get, what you perceive as better instruction, or are you speeding it up so you can get more reps? Again, we see this a ton in sports, any sport you pick it. Basketball with shot taking, we see players just getting a shelf of balls and shot right away. But that's not how it happens in a game. There's a rebound, there's a pass, there's a tempo to it. In volleyball, we see it when they go back to serve. Girls go back or guys go back and get a bucket of balls and they're just boom, 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 serving the ball. But that's not how it happens in a game. There's a ref whistle, there's a tempo to the game. Baseball, just throwing in pitch after pitch after pitch. Again, not how it actually happens in the sport. There's a tempo, there's a speed to it. And it may not seem like much, but when they get in the actual competition, then the recall's a little bit different because they're not used to that tempo. When we are working with students on how they test in the classroom, are you giving them that same amount of time for their practice, or are you just trying to get through the practice questions? The testing thing is very interesting to me because it's something that I just never really thought about while I was in school, but have certainly thought about, now and what I'm working on is a lot of times we're not prepared for the tempo of test taking. And that can actually throw a student off, right? Because if they're used to practicing and quickly going through, let's say, math problems, when they get in a situation where there's a test and they have, say, 30 minutes, they can be overwhelmed by the amount of time that they have. Not the shortness of time, but the amount of time. Like, wow, I finished this test, but I still have 20 minutes left. Did I do something wrong? And now they're questioning whether or not they went through it too fast because the tempo of the test was much slower than the tempo of the rapid fire questions and the practice exams that you've given them. Again, I'm not saying in any of these cases that we shouldn't adjust tempo, that we shouldn't do these rapid fires, but we need to not lose sight of the fact that at sometimes we have to practice at the tempo. A big one for us this year in our gym was when we worked on our pre-game and our pre-match routine. Instead of just blowing through it and saying, okay, these are the steps, we actually ran through it at the tempo, at the 20-minute tempo, so that when we got into it, they knew exactly what the tempo was going to be like. And I think so many times we lose sight of that when it comes to tempo. That we really need to practice it at the speed that we're expected to perform it when it's on the line. Again, not saying it has to be all the time, but I think a lot of times we forget to go back after doing a lot of the rapid fire stuff or after slowing it down so we can isolate specific actions in a skill. We forget to speed it back up or slow it down to real tempo and get it out there on the court, on the field, in real tempo, getting real time reps. I think that's a big one that we have to look at. And then lastly is one that may sound counterintuitive to what we've talked about before, but we want to try and use live demonstrations as much as we can versus video. Now, video, obviously, we've talked about it with feedback, we've talked about using it with instruction before, is a huge part of how we can educate and how we can teach, both in the classroom and in the athletic arena. But if we have the option to do a live demonstration or use someone that's a peer to the students and the players, that's what we want to go with because they relate to it better. They see it in person, they see a peer, someone that's close to their ability, and they think, man, I can do this because Timmy can do it. And I think so many times, again, we try and cram so much, we try and do so much that we pawn it off on video because it's easier. Hey, watch this video, or hey, look at this technique. Again, something that we have done in my program is finding clips of the Olympic teams and saying, hey, look at how they run this player, how they run that skill. But what I'm trying to get away from is just showing them that video and saying, hey, let's run it. What I'm going to do is try and find some players in my gym that can run it, and we'll work on it, and then demonstrate it with them because it has a much deeper connection. So maybe instead of showing them those professionals or those all-stars that are doing what you want them to achieve, start to find people in your gym, on your court, in your field, in your classroom that can do it. Again, it may not be exact, but we have to weigh that benefit. What's better if they can see it live with a player that's close to their skill, getting really close to what you want, or watching a video of elite players that are beyond their skill doing it? I think you'll find more value if you have the live training. So again, the whole concept of this week's vlog is how do you make your practices and your training believable? How do you make it transfer to what you need during competition or test taking or real life scenarios? To recap, my key areas are skill level. We want to make sure that we're not trying to advance it too fast or breaking it down too much. We got to find that sweet spot in the middle and know that it's going to be ugly a little bit. Two is we want to make sure that our training environment is as close as possible to what it's going to be like when we compete or need to actually recall and use that information. Three, what is the tempo that we're training at? Is it too easy? Is it too hard? Speed it up, slow it down. Again, much like the skill level, we have to find that sweet spot of what we're looking for. And then lastly, my last component of the believable scenario is we want to try and do as much live training versus video as possible. Again, love video for feedback and replays and looking at things, but when I'm demonstrating or we want to work on something new or how to improve something, I want to try and use a live real person as much as possible. So hit me up in the comments with how you make your training believable in your gym or in your classroom and some of the skills that you love. Again, I learned from this just as much as me trying to get the information out to all of you. I love hearing how different coaches, different teachers do different things, and maybe how I can adapt it to our training and what we're trying to do. So hit us up in the comments. Make sure you like, subscribe, share these videos, share the channel. Let's get the word out. Peace, much love, don't suck. See you next week. And don't forget, hit me up anytime at Real Dan Mickle on all social media.